Elden Ring has the most bosses of any FromSoftware game, and perhaps the most controversial. Players are split, with some exclaiming these to be the best boss designs yet, while others seethe in frustration because of how these bosses depart from the FromSoft formula.
Fuck!
This video seeks to understand the fundamental changes in Elden Ring's boss designs from that of its predecessors, and to critically look at the most controversial enemies and their supposed bullshit moves.
Fix the game! Fix the game!
Real quick, part 3 of my maidenless run is coming soon, and I'm going to be streaming it tomorrow at twitch.tv/lekevdev at 2 PM PST. See you there, Tarnished. The very first main story boss, Margit the Fell Omen, exemplifies many of the key features of Elden Ring's design philosophy. These features include roll catches, AoEs, long aggressive combos, and extremely delayed attacks. Those who have played Dark Souls 3 may liken this design to the infamous Nameless King, one of the most difficult optional bosses in the entire series. Margit holds many of the same properties, which are perhaps why he beat down so many new players and veterans alike. At least those who rush straight to Stormveil.
Foolish.
Now, to explain these mechanics more in depth, we first have what is known as roll catches. This term describes the timing of enemy combos that are synced to guarantee a second hit should the player spam the roll button after being hit by the previous attack. This exists to punish players who panic when receiving damage and may rely a little too heavily on their precious invincibility frames. I think of this as a bit of a rebalance to simply increase the skill floor for dodging, as it was almost always the most powerful and safest defensive action in previous titles, particularly Dark Souls 3. Elden Ring's bosses have also become known for their large number of area of effect attacks. These often come in the form of large circular sweeps or slamming the ground for a larger impact. These patterns are a direct result of the Spirit Ash's summoning system. The player now has the ability to summon a companion for every fight, so the devs had to give bosses tools to fight more than one foe at a time. When battling Margit, it can feel that he rarely leaves time for the player to launch a counterattack. He never runs out of stamina like you do, and when you think you finally dodged the last attack of his combo, he follows up with a new attack you never saw before. Margit is more easily punished than other demigods down the line, but for many players, combat may feel like taking turns on offense and defense. These long combos play directly into the next mechanic of large windups. Part of the reason Elden Ring's bosses feel as though their combos never end is that the windup for their next attack animation often begins right as they finish their last. Even within the middle of a combo, Margit will break his rhythm to throw you off tempo. Many often liken a Dark Souls boss fight to a careful dance, or even a rhythm game. When Margit decides to skip a beat, it throws his dance partner off tempo. I've seen many players upset by these feints, claiming it incentivizes memorizing timings and combos rather than reacting to the flow of the fight. I tend to disagree. I believe Elden Ring fundamentally plays differently than Dark Souls, and bosses should be treated differently as well. Players have trouble approaching these mechanics because they have to unlearn the Dark Souls rhythm. You cannot just dodge everything or block everything. Elden Ring incentivizes you to switch up your playstyle multiple times throughout a fight, even more so when able to use Torrent. Roll catches can be avoided with good positioning, roll direction, pausing between rolls, switching to blocking, or sometimes jumping. AoEs are often accompanied by wider or longer windups, while sweeps and ground slams can be jumped over easily. My personal favorite is the aggressive combos and long windups. Elden Ring has more counterattack measures than any other Soulsborne game through guard counters, jump attacks, and duck attacks. These defensive options allow you to dodge or block and attack at the same time. This means during these long combos you can remain on the offensive in between their larger attacks, building up posture damage for a visceral attack. These are all negatives for some players. A game with a wide variety of tools, mechanics, and playstyles may not work as well for someone who only wants to use melee weapons, no summons, and no shield. I often come across the statement, "I should not be forced to change my playstyle to beat a boss." I agree with this sentiment. However, you have to concede the notion that bosses need to have different strengths and weaknesses to promote player adaptation or mastery of your own style. Every Souls game has this. You don't have to beat Gwyn by parrying all of his attacks, but it sure is a hell of a lot easier if you do. For a player like me who never once used a shield in Dark Souls 1, simply learning his timings and combos to dodge was more appealing to me. Elden Ring is no different. However, Elden Ring does reward aggressive play more so than its predecessors due to the aforementioned mechanic exploits. I think a good example of all of these is found within the Crucible Knight, another hated difficult enemy placed in Limgrave. This knight stomped me more times than I could count. At first it was because I treated it like a Lothric knight due to its similar AI. This didn't work because of the Crucible Knight's immunity to backstab and attacks that adapt to your actions. Think you have some distance between you to go for a heal? It adapts with a lunge. In Elden Ring, the AI doesn't read your inputs, but the animation trigger of reaching for your flask. Maybe the devs should have put a few more milliseconds of delay so people don't think the game is cheating them. After many attempts, I got used to the attack patterns and beat it by dodging and staggering with my greatsword. Many found this fight tedious because the knight's punish window is minuscule, but it has more than you might think. When approaching the fight with a shield, I found this boss 1,000 times easier. You can guard counter in the middle of their combos, jump attack to get under their swings, parry them, break their posture, poke holes in their attack patterns, jump their tail, and kick their ass. This boss shows you something familiar but requires incredibly different mechanics to beat consistently. The only change I would make to these enemies would be to increase the rewards the player gets for beating them to be more appropriate to the difficulty. Before I review more specific boss fights, I wanted to quickly cover the different kinds of bosses. There are 3 separate categories of fights determined by the text upon victory: Enemy Felled, Great Enemy Felled, and Legend Felled. People often attribute these boss categories as evidence to the dropping quality or quantity of bosses in Elden Ring, but I think it's more productive to think of only the legends as bosses, great enemies as mini-bosses, and enemies as just strong enemies. So let's talk about some of these legends. First up, we have Radahn the Starscourge, one of the most divisive bosses in Soulsborne, being rebalanced not once but twice, while being some players' absolute favorite and others' most hated. This legendary demigod is so powerful that this fight allows you to summon multiple NPCs multiple times. It's like a raid boss from an MMO, with Blythe on DPS, Alexander the Jar pulling aggro, and the Finger Maiden dropping heals, and the player running around and rezzing everyone who dies. You can beat Radahn without ever lifting a weapon if you wanted to. I don't think this is a problem or ruins the boss because no one is forcing you to beat the boss this way. The problem for many is that Radahn can feel impossible without a summoned army at your back. What people can agree on is that Radahn is one of the greatest spectacle fights, with an epic run-up, iconic Phase 2 transition, a beautiful story, but I'd argue that Radahn's mechanics are just as well designed. His attacks are well telegraphed, he has a clear weakness indicated by the story, and the fight makes great use of both horseback and foot combat. I consider this to be a 3-phase boss, with the first phase being the run-up, the second phase being the first half of his HP, and the third phase following after he drops from the sky. I think the main frustration comes from the long and not to mention dangerous run-up in the first phase, before even being able to fight back. Though epic the first time, after 20 or so deaths it starts to get tedious. After the 1.03 update, Radahn's arrows had their projectile speed reduced, so the player can dodge them easily on horseback. This fixes the issue of running back on foot for every fight, but also reduces the intensity of needing to dodge with perfect timing. In the second phase, when you finally get to fight back, you can get one-shot by a wide-range attack aimed at a summon, and need to start the run all over again. It's difficult to gauge where his attacks will reach when the player isn't the target. It's often best to treat every attack as though it will hit you, and look for his openings regardless. You can't just smack the boss in the ass when using summons in Elden Ring, at least not as much. In Phase 3, Radahn receives some wild attacks with erratic movement, but remember, you have a horse in this game, and the battlefield is bigger than any other. Using Torrent can give you some space to reevaluate your approach, take a breather, and drink your tears. To heal, that is. Aesthetically speaking, Radahn is a 10 out of 10. Mechanically, after the 1.03.3 update, I think Radahn is an incredibly strong addition to the Soulsborne series that could only really exist in Elden Ring. Some may say he's a gimmick boss, but it's a gimmick that you choose exactly how much you want to engage with, if at all. Speaking of gimmick bosses, let's talk about Rhykard, aka Yhorm 2.0. If you don't already know, Rhykard uses the same gimmick as Yhorm the Giant from Dark Souls 3, where you get a special lore weapon that uses a special wind magic that's only effective against the boss who is near unkillable otherwise. Rhykard is a gimmick boss through and through, with some improvements from Yhorm, yet some steps back. Against Yhorm, you just had to spam the weapon art until you won. Rhykard is still a formidable foe. The player will need to use their entire moveset with the Serpent Hunter Spear, and stay on their toes to defend against Rhykard's massive attacks, especially in Phase 2. Some players even had to leave and upgrade their Serpent Spear, just to show how much this boss actually challenged players. The fight still has the obvious issue of forcing you to use a particular weapon, and your build has almost no effect on the fight whatsoever. But my main issue was the lava that surrounded Rhykard's base. This solidifies the fight as purely a gimmick for me. I can't brute force the fight and use my build to fight the boss with my own weapons without being extremely tedious and unfun. There are a lot of simple ways this fight could have been made a lot better. Instead of forcing us to use the Serpent Hunter, give us a Serpent Hunter Ash of War that makes the attacks with all of our weapons throw blasts of wind so we can use our own builds. Or just don't have the lava stagger us so we can brute force melee if we wanted to. This is the only boss that actively says, no, you can't play your way. That being said, I thought it was the best gimmick fight in all FromSoft games, being actually challenging and providing a full new moveset for the fight. I see a lot of people talking shit about my boy the Fire Giant. And while sure he isn't perfect, he definitely isn't as bad as some make him out to be. I really wish more bosses made use of Torrent, but the Fire Giant does a pretty good job. Once again, melee players are complaining about chasing down a boss when they have a goddamn horse. To be fair, this roll move does happen a little too frequently. Put a cooldown on that shit. Give him another way to handle players sitting under him. Chasing down a boss on horseback can be fun, in moderation. Once again, it's easier to dodge most attacks on foot rather than on Torrent, leading to a more interactive approach than just pressing the dodge button while approaching the Fire Giant. This avalanche move is an exception where you have to double jump over it with Torrent, but the timing and hitbox are a bit inconsistent for many players. I also think it was a bit of a missed opportunity to not allow the player to break his right anklet for an additional attack option in Phase 2. In Phase 2, most players just stick on the boss's ass, dealing reduced damage compared to his weak points on his arms. When an enemy's weak spot is also their weapon for attack, players will opt for a more reliable strategy unless the weak point is incredibly rewarding. Not to mention those arms are often raised in the air and unable to be attacked. The Fire Giant at least brings a great change of pace to legend battles and presents a different challenge from other bosses. It might not be as mechanically tight as other legends, but the fight brings a level of scale to giant battles that previous FromSoft games don't have. Not to mention the Fire Giant actually has a dynamic moveset, unlike some giants in the Souls series. Malenia, Blade of Mikola, and the Goddess of Rot, proclaimed as the hardest boss in Elden Ring, and complete bullshit.
I am Derma, Sword of Edward.
Okay, but for real though, I love this boss. Most players don't have a problem with Malenia's kit, other than the waterfowl dance and her lifesteal effect. I personally don't mind the waterfowl dance, but there's a reason everyone thinks it's bullshit. This attack is 10 times more difficult than the rest of the fight, and the difficulty spike leads to a lot of deaths and not a ton of learning. When a player is killed by this move, they ask themselves, how the fuck am I supposed to avoid that? Well, there are a few ways. Perfectly time your dodges, block with a great shield, run away from the first 2 attacks then dodge into the last, stagger her out of the air before she attacks, or burst her down before she can even use it. The skill floor for all of these options is extremely high, as expected for a late game boss, but if the player dies through a poor attempt at one of these options, they may mistakenly think it's impossible instead. I think players would find it a little less bullshit if the attack was used in a more consistent manner. Waterfowl dance can occur after Malenia drops below 75% HP, but occurs most frequently at about 50%. The range in the period in which she uses the attack can vary greatly, which means that the player will have a hard time adequately preparing for it. Because the dance can one-shot you, Malenia simply leaping in the air is panic-inducing when not mentally prepared for it.
You are not prepared!
She would be easy if it weren't for that one bullshit move.
Is a common sentiment. Sure, but I don't think that would make her better. This attack has been foreshadowed by multiple NPCs earlier in the game, and you can counter Malenia the same way you did Millicent. It's just a lot harder now. Again, I just think there needs to be a little more consistency on when Malenia releases the attack and how many times she can use it during the fight. Now as for her life-stealing ability, I've heard a few regard Malenia as a gimmick boss because of it. That's insane to me. Sometimes it feels like any boss that has any mechanics other than swinging a sword is a gimmick boss these days. This fight is a dance, a back and forth of attacking and healing. It's like Malenia is your New Game Plus character from Bloodborne. It's sick. Not gonna lie though, I think the second phase should have been harder. I felt like her combos left more openings than phase 2, but also dying to Scarlet Ionia because the cutscene broke your rhythm can be extremely frustrating. Finally, I want to talk about the final boss in the series.
Radagon of the Golden Order.
Radagon might be my favorite final boss in the Souls games. His movement and animations are fluid yet distinct, and his attacks impose a rhythm of constant offense and defense. He exemplifies many of the mechanics players hate in this game, from AoEs to delayed attacks to hyper-aggressiveness. At this point, the game has taught you how to handle all of these mechanics. What I love about this boss in particular is how when using summons, Radagon's attacks change direction deceptively naturally. He's another great example of how bosses were tuned much better around the use of summons. The Elden Beast is quite the opposite, completely breaking with a bit of AI manipulation. Beyond that, most players don't have a problem with Radagon, but the Elden Beast you have to fight after, while having reduced flasks. This boss is gorgeous, but it ruined the end of the game for some. It swims across the battlefield like an otter playing keep away, but also trying to kill you. The Elden Beast would be completely fine if you could summon Torrent. Like, why can't you? Thematically, it would be an amazing end to your journey, fighting alongside your main companion throughout the game, and mechanically, it would solve the frustration of chasing down this eldritch potato. After watching the Elden Beast for a bit, you can predict exactly where it will be next, so you can actually be right under it when it arrives. But this isn't always the case. With this fight covering so much space, it's horrible design to have invisible walls block the player when they didn't even know they were getting close. Make the walls natural, or don't have them at all. As for the Elden Beast attacks themselves, they're fine. I know everyone likes to complain about the ball that follows you everywhere, but you can just make some tight turns to avoid it, or heal through the damage. It's more difficult to learn how to fight against a move that rarely occurs and only in the second phase of a boss fight. You die from that and you didn't learn very much, and now you have to fight through Radagon again. That's one issue present in every double phase boss fight, which is why the second phase generally should build on the first and not completely replace it. I wanted to shoot through a few other bosses real quick just because I know people will ask. Renala, intriguing phase 1 with barely any challenge, better phase 2, but only a challenge for wizards. She needed some options to handle melee users. Malekith, I killed him too fast so I didn't get a good read on his design. Comment what you think of him. Dragons, fun at first. Great use of mounted combat, but once you kill one, you've mostly figured out how to kill them all. Godskin Duo also had no problem with this boss. Definitely not designed to be fought alone. They have different attack styles and you can use the pillars to train them away from one another. Duo fights in general are a result of designing purely around summons, resulting in a shitty experience for those who don't. Godric is fine, Horaloo is fine, Mohg's Lingering Fire is a bit annoying but otherwise fine, and Morgott is my favorite. Thank you for watching this video, make sure to subscribe. This video was partially edited by my friend Syntax, go check him out. By the way, part 3 of my maidenless run is coming soon, so stay tuned for that. See you next time.